Welcome back. This is lecture, where are we at? 4. We're at lecture 4 during this Cold War unit. Again, we started with the beginnings of the Cold War, then we went to the Korean War, then we went to the arms race and space race was our last lecture. Today's lecture is on McCarthyism, and it's named after a man that engaged in a certain set of tactics that we'll talk about today that really changed American history and culture during the time period and is still having an effect to this day, whether you agree or disagree. So we'll summarize it at the end, but we're going to talk about Joseph McCarthy today. This will be our 4th of 5 lectures, and the next time we'll talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis to try to summarize and sum up the Cold War. So thanks for watching. Let's get right into it, into our notes, be quick as possible. So here's Joseph McCarthy. He's a senator from Wisconsin, who I'll talk more about, but there's like a political cartoon made about him and sort of what he engaged in. He becomes a target of many people, and historians look back at what he did as a very awful thing, but at the time was kind of seen as a crusader. Why? Because he was fighting communists that were here within our government, and it seemed like he was rooting out and changing things for the better, which in fact he really wasn't. So this is the title of this comic, Bill of Rights, 1955. He's standing on the U.S. Constitution and ripping up the Bill of Rights, people's freedoms, etc. So, but Joseph McCarthy was a senator from Wisconsin, like I mentioned. So in the 1950s, as he's going through this process, was voted the worst senator by the Washington, D.C. press corps that was in Washington, D.C. Many of them were pretty anti what he was doing and engaging in because they themselves did not want to be a target of McCarthy or the Hewitt Committee, which I'll get into in a little bit. But he's going to switch parties. He's actually going to be a Democrat, then switch to the Republican Party. He's going to lie about his military experience. So automatically, as a senator, he probably shouldn't have much credibility. But he wanted to become a Republican. He switched to the Republican Party because he thought that it was within the Republican Party that he could really exploit this idea and use communism to heighten sort of his personal status and heighten his career as a politician, and use it as a way to embarrass Truman. And President Truman was our president from the late 40s into the early 1950s. So he especially, just like many other Republicans and Democrats at the time, felt that Truman lost China to communism, and so is going to be one of Truman's harshest critics. On February 9th, 1950, he's going to stand in the capital of West Virginia and claim that he has a list of 205 communists on a set of papers he has in his hand, which he never produced. And he never actually really found any communists. Now, he found communists that were in government that were already sort of outed by other people, but he himself never actually found communists. So it was just a fabrication of the list of names that he had on that list, and the people that he found and investigated were already being found and investigated by other people. So really a lost cause as far as a senator, and has a very bad reputation nowadays, as he should. So the Senate starts to investigate. He's a senator. So within the Senate, they start to investigate his claims of there's communists in the government. And after sort of they call a special session to investigate, are there communists that are working in the State Department? So again, it's one of our many executive departments that we have: the State Department, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Education, Department of Commerce. There's all these departments. And so they search the State Department, and those people that interact around the world and spread sort of American values and diplomacy and trade relationships throughout the world. That's the State Department. They end up not finding any communists working in the State Department. So at that time, you might be like, well, where's your list of 205? Let us see it. Give us names. And so McCarthy never produces any. Instead, he doesn't stop. He's like, oh, not only is it 205, I'm actually going to accuse other people, including probably his most famous attack is going to be on the Secretary of Defense, General George C. Marshall, who was one of our generals in World War II, basically in charge of operations. He got men and material and ammunition, planes, all this stuff. He's the guy that took it from America to the battlefront and coordinated all that effort. Very well regarded, very well respected. And so once McCarthy started attacking him, Marshall's just like, hey, what are you doing? And a lot of people, that's when they start to doubt really what McCarthy's saying. But he's going to go and continue to attack other people, especially those that are pretty powerless and not able to defend themselves. So he's going to attack African Americans that worked in government, Jews that worked in government, other foreign born, so immigrants that were not born here in America, as well as homosexuals. So he doesn't have a great record. He's attacking those people that are pretty defenseless, that are working in the government. And those people had to step down, resign, or would be fired just based on the accusation, because people are like, here's a senator, he must know what he's talking about, when in fact, he has no clue what he's doing. And in fact, he's damaging people's lives. So he was nicknamed Jolting Joe. The media is listening to him because, hey, he's providing a story. He's providing something to go investigate and to either, agree with or to really hate. And it's kind of just like President Trump's tweets that he sent out when he was president, right? It was one thing to go and see, hey, what's the president saying? Oh, who's he attacking? And it gave sort of the media something to talk about. And in most cases, they were not very kind to Trump's tweets, and Trump himself wasn't kind to many people in his tweets, right? So you can kind of make a loose comparison between those, but the media is sort of hinging on anything that McCarthy said to go find and figure out if his allegations are true or false. And in most all cases, they're false. The word communist found, but like I said, by other people that outed them. So, but in the early 1950s, he becomes the most powerful man in Washington, D.C., definitely the most powerful senator, before he's finally discredited and his career is ruined and his legacy is ruined, and is a teaching point for us today nowadays. So, but through sort of his support and encouragement of the Republican Party, who are seen as those that are actually trying to get rid of communists and get rid of this dangerous ideology that runs counter to America and our capitalist democratic system of government. So Republican win control of the White House and Congress, both the House and the Senate in 1952. That's when Dwight Eisenhower gets elected president. And so he's basically run out of enemies, right? Because the Democrats are not in control of any part of the national government. And so he has no one left to attack. So he starts attacking his own party. And it's at this time that things really start turning against him. The media start turning against him. By the spring of 1954, he says that there's communists within the military. And again, we're coming out of World War I. Now we're just coming out of the Korean War. And now he's saying, hey, there's even a dentist that's a communist that's working on our soldiers' teeth. And he's a communist implanting secret messages in teeth. No, he's not saying that, but it's pretty ludicrous claims. And so then President Eisenhower's like, enough of you. And so he launched an investigation into McCarthy and all these allegations that he's making about other people. And why is Eisenhower going to do that? Well, he's a former general of the army, right? So he's not going to allow his army that he served in and that people that served under him to be trounced by this charlatan and this fake. So he's himself is going to take personal direction against McCarthy in the Senate in these attacks that he's making against various people. So they are going to have hearings on the army. Are there communists in the army? But what they portray on television, these were televised and pretty well watched across America, but it's going to make McCarthy look like a bully. And he's going to pull out paper and make this accusation, then swing to another accusation and say, hey, you were here on this day. And then you were talking with so-and-so who's a known communist. What do you have to say for yourself? So he looked completely like a bully on one hand. And then on number two, he didn't look like he had any hard or good evidence. So the Senate finally was fed up with his lack of evidence and lack of truth. So by December 1954, they voted to censor him for his conduct. To censor means he doesn't have a voice in the Senate anymore. And so if you're a senator and you don't have a voice, you can't speak, you can't vote, really, you're just you have no power, right? You're not there for any good reason. And he's going to die a couple years later from alcoholism, pretty unrepentant of what he did in his power and attention grabbing of the early 1950s. Okay, so that's going to lead us into a more heightened sense of, we got to know, we're fighting communists abroad against the Soviet Union. We got to fight against this ideology of communism that might be here within the country. And so we are going to go and look and research these people that are in positions of power and see, hey, are they communists and are they affecting sort of our effectiveness as a country? And so we're going to go on kind of like a nationwide manhunt looking for these communists and trying to root them out. for better and for worse. But Julius and Ethel Rosenberg are a married couple that ended up working on the Manhattan Project. So they're some of these top secret scientists that were working on the top secret project. And they were found that they were passing secrets to the KGB, which is like the Secret Service, FBI for the Soviet Union. And so they get charged with conspiracy to commit espionage. It's in fact Julius that did in fact meet with a member of the KGB in their kitchen table. And and Ethel, the wife, just happened to be there. She didn't necessarily know what was going on. She never testified that she knew what was going on. Her husband just, was meeting with a friend or meeting with an associate from business or from some other scientists. So they ended up slapping her with conspiracy to commit espionage as well, which both sentences, or both of them are going to be eventually sentenced to death. So there is evidence that Julius was passing secrets, but not Ethel. And so they're going to get executed because they were passing, or really Julius was passing secrets about our atomic nuclear program to the Soviet Union. So, but people all around the world were trying to defend them, especially Ethel, and say, hey, you have no good proof that she actually did anything. People like the Pope and Albert Einstein were saying, hey, they did a vital work and a vital job for America, and sort of they shouldn't be treated so harshly to have to die. And they had 2 kids at the time, which was another reason to keep them alive for their kids' sake. But they ended up getting electrocuted to death. Okay. And so they're sentenced to the electric chair and were killed through electrocution. And then the Soviets are later going to confirm Julius's role. Yeah, he did pass some information to us, but Ethel, in fact, did not have any connections at all. She just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, really, with her husband, and was sentenced to death for that too. So another sort of government organization that's trying to root out. Now, McCarthy's trying to root out communists in government and find them, of which he does a really poor job, as I just mentioned. Now, HUAC, this is a committee in the House of Representatives, and their goal is to find communists in American society. So you have McCarthy looking for communists in government. You have HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee. They are looking for communists in society, because we don't want communist ideas sort of seeping into the American minds or teaching kids in public school or coming across in any of the movies or messagings that we are seeing on TV or in movie theaters. And so we want to make sure that we curtail sort of those ideas and those thoughts. And so at this time, it was a great idea. Hey, let's create a committee in 1938 to investigate fascists and make sure we stop fascists. It's like Antifa kind of nowadays, but they're working within government. And then to stop communists from being in government, in society as well. And so they're going to rely on accusations, like neighbors accusing people, workers accusing other coworkers of being communist or having pretty liberal or socialistic ideals. And so literally people are brought in before the HUAC committee in the House in Washington, D.C. to just hey, and tell us your story, or tell us your neighbor's story, name names, give us who you think are communists. And so it's literally like neighbors kind of turning in neighbor, colleague, coworker turning in coworker, teachers turning in other teachers, because we didn't want sort of these liberal ideals ideas trickling into American society when we're at war against those ideas against the Soviet Union, right? So they're going to rely on sweeping accusations, which is basically like you have a little shred of evidence. And so based on that evidence, he's a communist, she's a communist. And so there's going to be hearings where sort of just being in front of the committee made you look like you were already guilty when we didn't have our Fifth Amendment rights. You have the right to not self-incriminate yourself. You don't have to respond to questions by the government. It's on the government to prove sort of that you are a communist and you are guilty of that and you're doing harmful things. Which in many cases, many people were not convicted, but just this accusation made you look guilty, right? And then there was a pressure on people that were brought before the committee or be investigated to name names to get rid of this sort of communist thought in society and root it out. And so there was an assumption that your association, so just being around a suspected organization like a Communist Party or the International Workers of the World or other sort of labor unions, made you disloyal to America and anti-American, which in many cases was not true. Okay, so their representatives in the House are going to, why did they keep it going? Well, they realized that if they vote against HUAC, then it's going to be looking like they're anti-American. So they're put in between this kind of pickle spot where, hey, let's keep HUAC going. And they want to look like they're supporting sort of getting rid of communism and stopping communism here in America. And so if they voted against sort of this committee and what they are doing, it's going to be very public that it looks like, oh, they must be a communist too. They're in favor of communist ideas and ideals. And so they would become a target themselves too. And so everyone just kind of went along with it. In 1943, the House voted to make HUAC permanent. And then in 1947 is sort of the height of HUAC, and some of their most popular hearings was they called before them 10 Hollywood workers, so directors, screenwriters, and I believe one or two actors, and sort of asked them like, hey, are you a member of the Communist Party? And they would say, I plead the Fifth Amendment. So automatically they're looking kind of guilty, like they have something they don't want to say. And so these 10 individuals get what's called blacklisted, where they're not able to work. We would know it in today's culture as canceled. They got canceled from their jobs, canceled from their workplaces, weren't able to work in the future because of their certain ideals ideas, political ideologies that they might have had. It was obviously that they were liberal and leftist, but they never you know, so you can investigate them if you want. So basically that they got canceled. That would be a good way to describe it nowadays. But it's not going to stop at just those 10 people working in Hollywood, but it's going to continue your university staff. There's going to be a UW professor at the University of Washington who's going to be investigated. There's going to be clergy members, right? Because you have, especially Catholic priests, where those investigated, they're talking closely together. What do they want to do is all come together and help one another and have everything equal, give bread and share. And so it looks pretty suspicious of being like communist ideas. And then civil rights leaders too, with this idea of equality, which by essence is something that at a sort of government society-wide level, the Soviet Union loves, right? Equality. And we love equality too, but having equality of races, equality of genders, right? This is kind of a socialistic, communistic idea. And so even though those are good things on an individual level for everyone to be judged equally, society-wide, it was pretty revolutionary at the time and kind of what communists were advocating for, right? So here's some cartoons basically of this process. You have a HUAC committee running over people and destroying their lives. And then here you have McCarthy, he's smearing people that work in the State Department and in Congress. And, people are scared to put their names down for anything, any political participation during this time. We're so afraid of communism and its ideas seeping into American life and government that people are going to be accused, both rightly and correctly, because they are communists, and then have sort of devastating things happen to them, like removed from their jobs, or they can't buy property, things along those lines, no friends, or people that are just smeared wrongly, and they're not in fact communists or don't have those ideas. So both ways really is kind of define American rights and liberties that we enjoy as Americans. So just taking someone and smearing them and canceling them is generally not a great thing, right? So especially for HUAC, there's going to be friendly witnesses versus unfriendly witnesses. Friendly witnesses are going to be those that cooperated and said they weren't communists. And then what do you got to give in order to sort of get the spotlight off of you? Well, you would name names. And many times you just name a name kind of out of thin air and maybe someone you loosely knew or someone you actually did suspect, and that would get the spotlight off of you. And then unfriendly witnesses were those people that would come before HUAC and then claim the freedoms of the First, Fifth, Sixth Amendment, that, hey, this is a violation of my freedom of speech and my freedom of belief, my freedom to assemble. Five, hey, the Fifth Amendment is I don't have to incriminate myself. I plead the Fifth. And then the Sixth Amendment, this isn't due process. This isn't sort of a legal sort of way to go about harming people just based on their political beliefs, which is protected by the Constitution. A lot of the people, witnesses, were those that worked in films celebrating the working class during World War II. So again, during that time, it's kind of everyone wants to work together, right? We want to contribute to the war effort and win the war, but we're all working together. Everyone's equal, right? We're all sacrificing. Those are kind of very, communistic ideals that we also love in America. So how do you say those are bad? It's just sort of the framework of the time period that we're in that allowed sort of the persecution of these people during this time. Some of the famous people brought in to testify: Orson Welles, Charlie Chaplin, because he did a lot of movies where he encouraged like poor people and sort of unionized them and work together. Humphrey Bogart again. So a lot of famous people sort of brought in and questioned, hey, are you a communist? Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Sort of a question. So, and by 1950, this is really the height of McCarthyism in this time period. By the time we get to like the mid 1950s, and really McCarthy's gone, right? And by the mid 1950s, HUAC's still around and is going to be around through the 60s. It really starts to ebb out though. And so there always is this fear people can get smeared as being a communist and maybe their life and livelihood is ruined. But we're going to have the McCarran Act passed in 1950. It's going to make it illegal for Americans to engage in activities that would create a communist government. Okay. That would make a communist government, because again, we're at war with the Soviet Union in this time. So we don't want to sort of absorb those values and say it's okay to have communist values in America when we're fighting against them and what they're trying to do in the world. And so Truman's going to veto this act as president of the United States that comes out of the Republican Congress. But Congress is going to then override his veto with a 2/3 vote. And he's going to go on to say, Truman's going to say, in a free country, we punish men for the crimes they commit, but never for the opinions that they hold, right? That's protected as our individual constitutional rights, that anyone can sort of have their own political beliefs to believe what they want. And that's protected. Now, when they act in violence or they act in harm to one person, many people, or a government, land, right, then that's when we should be punishing people and taking away their rights and freedoms. But we shouldn't be doing it because of the opinions that they hold, is essentially what Truman is saying. And so how do we summarize really McCarthyism? So it's when you make public attacks on someone and resist their freedoms and their livelihood on the basis of their political, religious, or personal beliefs. Okay. And you might say, hey, this doesn't happen anymore. That was in the 1950s. That was the Cold War. Does this happen anymore? Well, I'm just proposing sort of this question to you, and you can think about it and respond in class if you want to. But so it's McCarthyism is doing harm to someone based on a real or a perceived threat. Okay, so at the time it was communism. Are you a communist? We can't have communists in America. That's bad. That's evil. So we are gonna, out you and sort of harm you and your livelihood and make sure you can't work, or we're gonna speak bad about you and get all of our friends to speak bad about you. And so that your life is negatively affected because of your beliefs that you have. So this happened during the Cold War, my second bullet point, especially for those that were left, and Democrats, socialists, communists, civil rights leaders are all going to be called sort of communists and could have their livelihoods and their freedoms endangered. But is that happening now currently too in what we call in our society and in our time period cancel culture? And you might agree that cancel culture is real and it's out there and it's happening, or you might disagree that it's happening. So our opinions and beliefs, are they canceled nowadays? So this is a big term of discussion now, and it's kind of like a form of McCarthyism, right? Where people are being attacked based on their political beliefs and opinions. So the left right now would say they have various responses, but cancel culture is not a real thing. And we sort of briefly talked about Dr. Seuss and 6 of his books not being published by his publisher anymore, and trying to talk about that a little bit. Or the left, people on the left would say, hey, we need to cancel and get rid of ideas that are racist, that are harmful, that separate and segregate society. We need to get that out of society and of the public conversation. So it's okay for businesses to do those things. It's okay for people to get on social media and talk bad about you if you have the wrong opinion. It's okay if our government steps in and sort of stops what you are doing, because we want to make sure that those bad ideas aren't out there. And then the right would just say, hey, are people's opinions being canceled? Yes, they are. And they would cite several examples that are out there. And so it's up to you to go, is this modern day McCarthyism? So is this a connection from the 1950s into today? I would love for you to think about that and engage with this idea. Here's a meme that I found. Here's Oprah, right? And giving away stuff. And so this is cancel culture be like, you're canceled, everyone's canceled, you're canceled. So, but go ahead and think about that. We might discuss it, or I would love to hear from you and your thoughts about modern day cancel culture and whether it's something real and something that could be compared to McCarthyism. So thanks for sticking around and engaging with this. We'll connect with the Cuban Missile Crisis next time in our last lecture for the Cold War, and then we'll move into the Vietnam War, which is probably the height, the zenith of this sort of anti-spread of communism that happens in the rest of the world that we want to